Welcome to the City Current Show. I'm your host, Jeremy Park. We're always honored to bring you inspiring stories of individuals and organizations making a difference, empowering the good. And we're honored to kick it off with Justin Harvey. He is the co-founder of abrasiveMedia and the director of Project Awake. Justin, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Jeremy. Thank you so much for having me on. Hope you're staying cool today. It is a toasty one outside.
Absolutely. Yes, indeed. So we have a lot of good to talk about. Let's start with abrasiveMedia, though, because that's where it starts on your end. So give us a little background and context around abrasiveMedia.
So abrasiveMedia is an artist organization. We don't say that we're an arts organization because we exist to support artists. So we founded this in 2001 as a way to pool resources. We found out that a lot of artists in Nashville, be it performance art or visual art or music, all had a very similar audience. And they were all the artists were struggling to find resources and opportunities to present. So the idea was, what if we bring these artists together, we pool our resources, we pool our talent, and use that to create new and unique works and then share audiences, right? And it grew from there.
I know you're in the middle of a pivot, including a location, and we'll talk about that in a second. But when you talk about some of the cool things you've done in the past, a lot of events, a lot of collaboration. And so give us a little bit of a kind of the pivot from then to now.
Yeah, so for the first 15 years, we focused on doing a lot of collaborative art programs. So mixed genre shows where we would bring together painters and writers and dancers and musicians and do variety shows. From that, we grew into a space that we were using for arts incubation. So we had a studio space available for artists where we brought in a residency program where we would take artists and give them the skills and the resources to create these big ideas and then present them to the public, which ended up with things like The Anomaly, which was the world's first and only gallery-sized graphic novel. It was 321 large-scale paintings that were hung in 7,000 square feet of space that we had that you had to walk through to read the narrative. It was a really cool project. We've done things where we've brought together dancers and aerial silks performers and musicians for a thing called Dear Apocalypse, which was an hour-long theatrical presentation that blended all those elements and poetry, and it was just a really cool experience. And we used that to help address issues of PTSD, and did that in association with a couple of other nonprofits that work with soldiers returning from war and people who've been through abusive situations. And so, yeah. A lot of really cool collaborative arts projects, and typically they have a focus on positive social change in some capacity. So we had that space in the Wedgwood, Houston neighborhood, created a neighborhood-wide art crawl, had thousands of people out every first Saturday of the month for a new artist presentation or a collaborative artist presentation. And ran that space there from 2012 to 2019.
And I think all of this will lead us into Project Awake. I know one thing you wanted to touch on, because Nashville, and you're seeing this with other cities as well, as it continues to grow and more people come in and more businesses, it creates a lot of challenges. You see the traffic challenges, but you also have an infrastructure challenge around buildings and spaces for creatives to go and develop their craft and collaborate. And so talk about kind of that side of what you're seeing for Middle Tennessee and for Nashville.
Yeah, absolutely. So I can give you an anecdotal story about our space. We did this in collaboration with the building owner in Wedgwood, Houston, at Houston Station. And we were able to, initially when we moved in, we were the first tenant in the building. And we provided the space for artists. And as we created these art crawls and more people started coming to the neighborhood, we started having restaurants move into the neighborhood and coffee shops, and it created a lot of foot traffic. And so larger businesses like Apple Music found out about the neighborhood. They bought a building there to turn it into a music venue. And around that time, because of this huge influx of commercial investment happening in the neighborhood, the rents became astronomical. It became so much that we could no longer afford to be in the space as a nonprofit organization. And that's an example of what's happening to artists all over the city. it tends to happen that artists will gravitate to places where they can afford space. So these are typically, neighborhoods that have been run down or neglected in some capacity, very industrial. But the thing is when artists go there, people follow them. And eventually, if artists aren't able to, actually own the property at the onset, they get priced out of it very quickly. And they keeps pushing artists outside of the city, further out. And that's one of the things that we've noticed with, be it a painter or a dancer or a musician or an actor, people are saying, I'm having a really hard time staying in this city, not just for, space for an artist, for working for commercial space, but also residential. It's becoming increasingly difficult for artists to live here. And that's, it's really sad because that's the thing that has made Nashville so attractive for so long, is this vibrant arts and creative community. And I'm afraid we're going to lose it if the city doesn't take action to help, build up arts infrastructure here.
And I think that's one kind of throughout the challenges is how do we get businesses and other organizations to sponsor, support, create these spaces for the collaboration, the classes, the events, all of this to activate and not lose the very thing that gives the culture, all the things, the special ingredients to Nashville. And so I think that's the challenge, is then activating to create that, because to your point, artists are the first ones to go in and transform an area, and then it gets developed. And then next thing you know, it's like, well, then the artists are pushed on to the next place. So how do we maintain that sense of ownership for creatives to give them permanency within the very place that they're helping to activate? Let's go ahead and switch over, because all of this ties into Project Awake. And so when you look at kind of building this momentum, talk about leading in and what has created Project Awake.
Yeah, so being a collaborative arts organization, we started discussing years ago, what could we do as a creative community to help reduce bullying, violence, sexual assault, and substance abuse in Middle Tennessee high schools. And like you said, art has this amazing power to transform areas, right? But it can also transform communities and transform mindsets. And so we started putting together a team to create a program that would go into the high schools as a theatrical production. Think something along the lines of like a Cirque du Soleil show, where we would blend, dance and martial arts and gymnastics and acting and very, elaborate costuming, and use this to tell a story about overcoming adversity and challenging students to realize their potential to make a difference in their schools, how one person can stand up and make a positive impact in another person's life, and then that can spread. It's a catalyst. So the idea was pitched with our team, and our board of directors said, this sounds like a great idea, let's do this. And so we put it on our agenda for 2019. And we began producing this program. 2020 came, we debuted the show at NSA, which is Nashville School of the Arts, for 500 students, and then another show immediately after for another 500 students, and to get their feedback. And this was a very bare bones production, very, simple. We didn't have the crazy costuming we wanted, we just had the story and the choreography. And we presented the show, and it was a huge success. I mean, the students loved it. The feedback that we got was incredible. Educators were saying, we've never seen anything like this in our schools, and the way that it has resonated with students is something that we desperately need. And so we knew that we had a winner. This was a project that we would be taking forward for an indefinite amount of time. And then 2 weeks later, the schools closed because of COVID-19. So our entire show, our entire program went on hiatus, and it has been there until last month, where we got another grant from a funding organization here in town, and we're back in production again.
Give us some of the basics when you talk about the number of team members to put on the show, the time that's allocated. So for schools to kind of fit this in for their programming, give us some of the nuances.
Yeah, so the team is, there's 10 performers in the company. We have a wide variety of different backgrounds for the artists, and everyone cross-trains in each other's disciplines. So you have, the people who've done ballet their entire life are now learning gymnastics or learning acrobatics or martial arts, and vice versa. So it's a really fun collaborative arts environment just for the performers, first of all. And the program itself stays in line with the mission of Abrasive Media, which is to support artists. So we're very intentional about making sure the artists are paid, and they're paid well for what they do, because they're putting their bodies on the line. They're dedicating their time to be available to speak to students after the show. So we're very intentional about taking care of the artists. But then also the show itself is designed to be like a 25-minute assembly program. So that's about how long schools allocate for a group presentation for the entire student body. So we come in, the show is actually 25 minutes long from start to finish. And then we have a Q&A session afterwards where students can engage with us after the show. And what we found out in doing those initial debut shows was that students become extremely open to dialogue. They want to converse. And we had a couple of kids come up to us who opened up about some very serious issues going on in their lives, and they needed help immediately. And so we were then able to connect them to resources in the school with guidance counselors or support programs that would then work with them. So that's the program in a nutshell. It's really meant to come in and get students inspired and to get them talking amongst themselves and with their teachers about what they can actually do to make a difference in their communities.
To your point, opening the dialogue, being the convener, but the conduit to say, hey, we're going to then push you in all the right directions to make sure. Because when you look at mental health, drug and alcohol addiction, when you look at stress and bullying, all the things that especially high school students are dealing with, it's a lot. And so to be able to put something in front of them that's entertaining, that's engaging, but ultimately that's going to spark a conversation and get them to open up, that's the power of what you're doing.
Yeah.
Don't give it away, but give us a little bit of a teaser of the storyline.
It deals with these 10 main characters that are being subject to an experiment. They're essentially androids, if you will, that are in a laboratory, and they're being subjected to experiments that increasingly compromise them in ways that can cause them to lose their identity. It can cause them to cause harm to others or to themselves. And as this continues to go on, one character emerges as kind of an antithesis to the situation, and they stand up against the person or the entity that is causing these situations to happen. And we don't end with a pretty wrapped up storyline. We end with the moment of standing up and choosing not to go along with it. And right as the situation starts to change, the story ends. And we do that for several reasons. First of all, we didn't want to give kids an answer. We wanted to cause them to think and to hash through these issues, on their own, to really think through the consequences of their actions and the way that their choices impact themselves and others. But then also leave the storyline at the end saying, here's where things are going, but really the story is in your hands. It's up to you to choose what happens next, because everything that they saw on stage is really just a representation of everything they deal with on a daily basis in their schools. So yeah,
that's
very
allegorical. Leave with the cliffhanger too. I like that. That's good.
Yeah, it's great. the to be continued is their next few minutes after that.
But I think it leads in perfectly then at school, because then the teachers can then pull them back in and have a whole conversation around that. So, I mean, you're leaving them with, fuel to go and then talk and, and carry that conversation forward, which is awesome.
100%.
So talk about for schools, how to activate, because as you mentioned, there's a cost on your end. You've got a grant, but obviously there's a cost on your end to put together the show, obviously scheduling and some of those. How do schools reach out? How does it work?
Yeah, so schools can actually request a booking on our website, which is projectawake.org. And we have information about booking on there. A lot of times, we found in talking to schools that they do have allocated money for assembly programs, but sometimes it's very vague and they're unsure exactly what they have each year. So we've been talking to MNPS, which is Metro Nashville Public Schools, about additional funding sources. And we've connected with their Community Achieves program, which essentially works to connect businesses to schools that will help provide resources. So we're now talking with local businesses near these school locations to say, hey, we're going to be in your school next year. You have an investment in this community, we hope, and would you be willing to help sponsor the school to cover the cost of the program? So yeah, so I mean, really, it's gonna take partnerships, because there is federally mandated funds for schools, but there's zero oversight on how that money gets spent for assemblies, which means a lot of times they end up going to other resources where schools need those funds. And so yeah, we're kind of figuring this one out right now as we go, of how we can get more community engagement, more local business engagement to help us, make an impact in the schools.
I think that's an easy way for any business leader who's listening to say, or watching to say, hey, I want to be involved. There's an easy way to get involved with Project Awake and be able to really help and support the students. But then also too, going back to the original conversation with Abrasive Media, being able to just fuel access for arts programs and creatives and artists. So I think in both ways, businesses, individuals who just want to support the arts and be intentional about, everything that we're talking about, especially for high school students, you can be an easy activation for that. So wrap up once again with how to get in touch with you. So mention website, social media, phone number. Where do we go to learn more and connect in?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can check us out on the Abrasive Media website, which is abrasivemedia.org. You can reach us on Project Awake's website, which is projectawake.org. All of our social links are on those websites, so you can follow us anywhere from there. And you can email me directly if you want to, justin@abrasivemedia.org.
Well, Justin, thank you for all you and your amazing team do. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. Great talking with you.